is a very different administration than the United States has had in the past. Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations when I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us. We will defend our common security, our shared prosperity, and our sacred liberty. We did not choose to draw here on this peninsula. This magnificent peninsula, the thin line of civilization that runs around the world and down through time. But here it was drawn, and here it remains to this day. It is the line between peace and war, between decency and depravity, between law and tyranny, between hope and total despair. It is a line that has been drawn many times in many places throughout history. To hold that line is a choice free nations have always had to make. We have learned together the high cost of weakness and the high stakes of its defense.
Korea, do not underestimate the United States because times they've changed.
The regime has interpreted America's past restraint as weakness. This would be a fatal miscalculation. This is a very different administration than the United States has had in the past.
The president gave those words and the rest of that speech to South Korea's National Assembly. He said the United States will defend itself and its allies, so do not try us. In modern parlance, don't come for me. The president is now in China, North Korea's biggest friend in all the world. China sees North Korea as a sort of, well, a buffer to a unified Korean peninsula. That's important to China in a big way. In this speech in Seoul, President Trump called out China, saying, cut the cash flow to Kim Jong Un and his regime. Our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, traveling with the president and live in Beijing for us tonight. John?
And more on that to come later on today when the president meets with Xi Jinping. We'll get into that in just a moment. The president arrived here late afternoon Beijing time, early in the morning there in New York. And the first part of this state visit really given over to ceremony. The president having tea with Xi Jinping, watching a Chinese opera at the Forbidden City, very colorful, and then having dinner with Xi Jinping. Before leaving Seoul, South Korea, he did give that speech that you alluded to at the National Assembly, where at the same time he played good cop and bad cop. First of all, laying out an extensive indictment of what he portrayed as Kim Jong Un's criminal behavior and his ruthless dictatorship there, warning him in very stark terms not to mess with the United States and its allies by continuing to develop a nuclear weapons program. Let's listen to more of what the president said.
The weapons you are acquiring are not making you safer. They are putting your regime in grave danger. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face.
So there was the bad cop version of that, and then the president flipped to the good cop version. There are some diplomats who have dealt with North Korea who believe that really what Kim Jong Un is looking for is an off-ramp from this crisis and a way to get out of his nuclear weapons program and developing relations with the United States. Perhaps because he was in South Korea, and Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, wants to keep tensions down on the Korean peninsula, or whether it really is a genuine opening. The president offered, I wouldn't say an olive branch, but did offer sort of an off-ramp to Kim Jong Un. Listen here.
Despite every crime you have committed against God and man, you are ready to offer, and we will do that. We will offer a path to a much better future.
The president offering North Korea a path to a much better future. Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, did the same thing in a press conference the night before. What did North Korea think about all of this? Here's an official statement. The U.S. must oust the lunatic old man from power and withdraw the hostile policy toward North Korea at once in order to get rid of the abyss of doom. Shep, they didn't seem to take too kindly to the speech. However, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham and Madeleine Albright, who was the Secretary of State in the Clinton administration, both said they thought it was a good speech. Shep?
John, what do you expect to hear from the president while in China?
There's not going to be a whole lot that we're going to hear. He's got a restricted bilateral meeting in about 5 hours' time with the president. That could be just the two of them, and then interpreters, and then an expanded bilat where all the diplomats and the national security people will come in, and they'll talk about the way forward on North Korea. They'll talk about the way forward on trade. And then they have got statements only, Shep. They won't be taking questions because the Chinese have said no questions. And then he may also meet with Putin, by the way, in Da Nang, Vietnam later on this week to try to enlist more help from Russia.
And North Korea have traded insults again. Pyongyang's called Trump the lunatic old man before adding Washington's not fit to act as a judge of human rights. That's after President Trump described North Korea as a hell that no one deserves during his stop in Seoul as part of his Asia tour. He also issued a stark warning to the hermit state.
When I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face.
And President Trump is now in China for the next much-anticipated leg of his trip. The visit has already proved fruitful. It's being reported that the U.S. and China have signed some 20 trade deals worth $9 billion. The Chinese side has dubbed them a warm-up before a bigger ceremony on Thursday. RT's Samira Khan looks back at Trump and Xi's previous meeting.
As Donald Trump arrives in China on his five-nation Asia tour, it's now the Chinese president's turn to roll out the red carpet.
Just 6 months ago, the Chinese leader came to Washington, and the two hit it off, bonding over chocolate cake. But Trump couldn't help but be a bit theatrical during the dinner, topping the magnificent dessert with a show of Washington's military might.
We had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen, and President Xi was enjoying it. So what happens is, I said, we've just launched 59 missiles heading to Iraq.
Well, you headed to Syria?
Yes, heading toward Syria.
Trump loves his weapons so much he thinks they're the solution to every problem. And when the threat is as serious as North Korea, all the other countries in the region must be armed to the teeth and prepared to respond. Well, that's the idea he's been trying to sell on his Asia trip, so far in both Japan and South Korea.
Prime Minister, Japan is going to be purchasing massive amounts of military equipment, as he should. South Korea will be ordering billions of dollars of that equipment. We make the best military equipment by far. We make the greatest military equipment in the world. The F-35 fighter, which is the greatest in the world, Missiles of many different kinds, whether it's planes, whether it's missiles. We make the greatest military equipment by far in the world. We'll be purchasing it from the United States. Thank you very much.
Now, Trump is counting on the Chinese president to back him up as he puts pressure on Pyongyang.
President Xi, where we will be tomorrow, China, has been very helpful. We'll find out how helpful soon, but he really has been very, very helpful.
Well, it's often said that diplomacy is merely seduction in another guise. So the question is, will Trump's efforts to seduce the Chinese leader carry over? And will he be able to strike a sweet deal for the U.S.? Samira Khan, RT, Washington, D.C.
International relations expert Victor Gao believes no matter what Donald Trump says, China should stick to a peaceful approach.
President Donald Trump is a very controversial president, but I think from the Chinese perspective, we need to deal with the presidency of the United States very seriously. So whatever rhetorics or other things which President Donald Trump may resort to, China needs to stand firm on its own principle and do the right thing. That is to avoid war and stand firm for peace. President Donald Trump has been known in recent months for using very inflammatory rhetorics about DPRK. And I personally believe these rhetorics is not helpful at all. It's not constructive. The United States has been selling huge amount of military weapons to many countries in different parts of the world. Selling more weapons may actually make whatever military confrontation which may happen even more bloody, causing more loss of life, and that's the wrong thing to do at this very particular moment when peace is at stake.
Coaster on how we handle the North Korea issue. The president seems to be on course.
Well, he's doing his best to try to address different constituencies, different audiences that have different messages they want to hear from the president to some type of peace agreement with North Korea. You heard the president gently floating the idea that there was a resolution possible for North Korea on this if they're willing to come to the table. And now that he's in Beijing, we can expect a lot tougher tone, more of a focus on here are the things that we still need to do to apply maximum pressure economically on the North Korean regime.
Is there a chance to get something out of China in this case, with the understanding that China needs North Korea to be a sort of buffer to a unified Korean peninsula?
Well, we have to give the Trump administration credit for getting a lot from China already, as far as ordering North Korean businesses to shut down in the near future in China, and some restrictions on energy flows between the countries that came under a UN resolution. Now, there's more that the U.S. wants from North Korea, including, and from China specifically on North Korea, including really shutting down these guest workers, cutting off all last trade that goes over the border. But the U.S. also has to be super careful, Shep, that they do not push China to a position they're not comfortable with, which would be the North Korean regime collapsing and a lot of instability for China along its border.
What's the concern level that the North Koreans might try something, test something, be provocative in some way while the president's on this trip?
Right. Well, the North Koreans have said they're less concerned now about what Trump is saying and more concerned about the actions. And those actions along this trip include several aircraft carriers and other U.S. military equipment that has been moved into the region as a show of U.S. military force. Now, oftentimes, North Korea responds to those kinds of machinations by doing something a little bit provocative themselves. If they were to try to conduct a test or do something else that shows they're not going to just accept all of this harsh action from the U.S., that would certainly ratchet up tensions very quickly and force Trump to respond to that while he's in Asia.
Josh Lederman, live from the State Department. Josh, thank you.
To make. We have learned together the high cost of weakness and the high stakes of its defense.
Korea, do not underestimate the United States because times they've changed.
The regime has interpreted America's past restraint as weakness. This would be a fatal miscalculation. It is a very different administration than the United States has had in the past. Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations when I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us. We will defend our common security, our shared prosperity. Calculation. This is a very different administration than the United States has had in the past.
The president gave those words and the rest of that speech to South Korea's National Assembly. He said the United States will defend itself and its allies, so do not try us. In modern parlance, don't come for me. The president is now in China, North Korea's biggest friend in all the world. China sees North Korea as a sort of, well,
and our sacred liberty. We did not choose to draw here on this peninsula. This magnificent peninsula, the thin line of civilization that runs around the world and down through time. But here it was drawn, and here it remains to this day. It is the line between peace and war, between decency and depravity, between law and tyranny, between hope and total despair. It is a line that has been drawn many times in many places throughout history. To hold that line is a choice free nations have always had.